Thank you so much for having me here today. As was alluded to, yes, I've had the privilege of working with Springfield City Group 14 years now. The challenge and/or opportunity with Springfield historically has always been about communicating and having people understand what the growth story and the growth potential around Springfield has been. What is different now, 14 years later, is that that growth story is a lived experience. I think one of the interesting things when we look at the population of the area, as was mentioned, 55,000 people within Springfield City. The population has grown year on year for the best part of the last 15 years at 6% per annum. And a big part of that has been driven by a highly aspirational, highly economically engaged population, particularly couples and family with children who are seeking a lifestyle as well as accessibility to economic opportunities. And you can see that through some of the population figures. The scale of the growth going forward, the population here, it's only just halfway through its population growth profile, as we've seen to 2046. So it's about 50,000 people now, projected to be 100,000 people in the city over the course of by 2046. And I think one of the interesting things when we look at some of the data going forward, one of the interesting things about the demographics, the socioeconomics around Springfield is that it is very homogenous from a values perspective. It's actually an incredibly diverse population, socioethnically, in terms of place of origin, in terms of language. But the values that sit within a lot of these communities and a lot of the households about what are they seeking from their life here in Springfield is very uniform. And that is, they're here to work, they're here to run businesses, they're here to generate wealth, and they're here to have an upwardly mobile aspiration for their children. This is a structural story that exists across all of the Springfield City area. And we have unemployment rates that have been structurally half that of the state average, if not lower, now for the entirety of the project's existence. So this has, from the very beginning, been a low unemployment area with very high labour force participation amongst both men and women in households, and importantly, is also a young population. So you're seeing these compounding effects economically that are happening. Younger population means there's a bigger workforce for the size of the population. That workforce is economically engaged and also has a lower unemployment rate. That cascades through to the levels of socioeconomic aspiration that we've seen in the population to date. It's also borne out by the skills profile of the population. So we're seeing 4 in 10 people with post-school qualifications have bachelors and above. There's about 1,200 people who are in the top 1 to 5% of skilled jobs in the economy that are living here in that part of the Springfield economy. That's expected to reach over 3,000 within the next 10 years. So this, again, there's this compounding effect of the relationship between the economy, the population, and the skills and the business requirements for businesses going forward. And that's also reflected in the fact that it's an incredibly entrepreneurial population. There's a value set in the community across all demographics, across all socioethnic groups around coming to Springfield, being aspirational to send your kids to high quality schools so that they can achieve higher outcomes in their lives, setting up and running businesses from this location, being involved in significant tertiary level services and businesses and infrastructure, to the point where we've now reached something of a turning point of Springfield where the economy, despite 6% population growth year on year, the economy is growing faster than the population. One of the things that we can see is that while you're seeing a decline in fertility rates across the country, you're seeing an aging of the population, real headwinds for the growth of schooling needs into the future across the country or even across the state. That's not the case in Springfield. One of the other interesting factors when you look at the population is the fact that it is demographically and from a household composition perspective quite homogenous. It is a family destination, residential destination of choice, couple families with children being the overwhelmingly predominant sort of household that exists within the primary and also to an extent within the secondary catchment as well. So what does this mean for schools? We wanted to look at schools from a very holistic perspective across all different sectors, so not just government versus non-government, but also to start to understand where those fragmentation opportunities, those niche particular opportunities based on specific drivers are coming forward in Springfield, and what's the scale and critical mass of those opportunities, to understand where are their investment milestones or investment triggers that are likely to come forward into the future. And so this results in where we're seeing at the moment, which is, as of 2023, latent demand sitting there of around 14,500 places. So what it suggests is that even now there was an undersupply in total schooling places within the Springfield area as of 2023, 2024 of between up to 1,000 places. So people who otherwise would come here are going elsewhere because of capacity constraints in a number of the schools and or challenges we saw with COVID in terms of delaying expansions to schools and other projects. Also, the impact that capital cost escalations and construction cost escalations have had, and that's having an impact in terms of creating a pent-up demand. But that's just now. As of the next sort of 20 years, there's an additional 10,000 students who want to come here, who are being generated out of that population in the surrounding area. And that even includes and considers the significant investment that's expected in areas like Ripley, in other parts of Greenbank and down to Flagstone, in schooling in those areas. So this is not suggesting, if anything, Springfield's role under this scenario actually decreases within the wider catchment because of that decentralized response to schooling. So even with that response, even with all those projected investments occurring in other areas, there's still another 10,000 students that need to be accommodated within Springfield over the course of the next 20 years. How do you deliver primary and secondary education solutions for activity centres that are servicing growing areas that have populations that in some cases are doubling within a 20-year period? How do we do that? The models are changing and have to change in response to that. And with that comes a uniformity of shared values of aspiration of educational outcomes for your kids. And that's a very different, that's not a uniform view across society as a whole, but it is a shared value here. And that's actually where the homogeneity comes from. It's not from age, it's not from socioeconomics, it's from values. And that veers very heavily when we talk about things such as non-government school enrolments, which basically now have reached a point where there's a need for at least 2 more 1,500 plus P-12 schools within Greater Springfield of a primary nature within the next sort of 20 years. And we all know how hard it is to plan schools and then deliver schools. So the reality is we're already well behind on the non-government school front when it comes to the growth. And considering that the growth potential of the existing schools is increasingly limited, and Springfield is at the precipice of that because its principal activity centre role, because it has that exposure to the wider 400,000 people, but because its economy is now growing faster than its already rapidly growing population. And that is a unique driver. And so with that, you have this enrolment demand that is growing faster and faster and is expected to reach well over 25,000 students of demand for places here in Springfield to service that wider population. So ultimately, the Springfield story is not about Springfield anymore. It's about everywhere around Springfield. The great thing is that Springfield is still also expected to double in size. So it is a double whammy of demand that is expected to drive into Springfield, and that there will continue to be, no matter what options are delivered around Springfield to cater for that population, there is still an overwhelming aspirational value set that sees Springfield as an education destination of choice, dovetailed in with it being a residential and an economic destination of choice as well. That's actually part of the uniqueness of Springfield, is that there's this constant injection of economically engaged people who have values linked to aspiration for themselves and their generation going forward. And that's an infectious thing for a culture and a society to have at a local level. And you can see that borne out in that, not just that it's a multicultural place, but it is a highly economically engaged place and a highly socially and culturally engaged place as well. And that flows through to the diversity of schooling of students in terms of all different cultures and all different societies, but also the success, I think, is demonstrated by a lot of the schools and all the schools within Springfield of how centrally the issues of multicultural, how centrally the values and asset that ethnic and cultural diversity is to Springfield is embedded into the culture of those schools as well. So it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity for Springfield, and it's one that's always been there, but it's also one that's going to become even more stark going forward into the future as the population ages around the country, migration becomes even more important in terms of our population growth and sustainability of our growth into the future. Springfield's already a destination and an established brand for that economically engaged, culturally integrated, culturally diverse, genuinely multicultural society and economy and community, and that flows through to the schooling as well. Thank you very much.